Welcome to the Aboriginal channel. This episode will be another part to Aboriginal forts and castles. So right here we're looking at where the Civil War battles took place at. And in this episode we're going to focus on an area right here where these battles took place along the coastal line in between Georgia and North Carolina. Basically in Savannah right here, Charleston, I think that's Wilmington. Basically right here, we already looked at the one that surrounds Jackson, St. Augustine, and then there's one right up here. But we're going to be looking at the one in Savannah, Charleston, Wilmington, and then Raleigh, and then there might be another one up here at Atlantic Beach in North Carolina. So a total of about 5 of them. But before we look at them and I start reading a little bit of the information, I want to point out a simple thing. If you think back on all the Civil War movies that we've seen, you never seen buildings built with brick that they were going in and out of. Now, I could be wrong, but I remember just wood houses and tents in those Civil War movies. So when we go in and look at this, I want you to remember that they never showed us these brick forts, just like they never showed us mounds. They always showed us Indians or Native Americans with tents. And on a side note, I previously mentioned that the Indians down in Peru built Machu Picchu up on the mountain 8,000 feet above sea level in the 1400s. So therefore, the craftsmanship, the engineering of these forts and strongholds only got better. And I mentioned in numerous previous videos and from numerous books that describe numerous places in North America that had cities with bricks and buildings. Like over in California, it said they had stately cities and magnificent buildings. So basically what I'm attempting to do here is correlate what the book is saying to us to what can be seen out here in reality. Before I go into Savannah and show you Fort Pulaski in Georgia right there, I want to stop and look at Fort Macomb right here in Louisiana. This is sort of catty-corner to that fort from a previous video called Bogart's Castle. This is Fort Macomb in Louisiana, and that's how it looks. See how it's basically identical to numerous other forts in other areas of the country. It says Fort Macomb is a 19th century United States brick fort in Louisiana. It says the United States built the current brick fort in 1822. Then it goes on to say that the Confederate States Army garrison took control of and occupied the fort starting on 28th of January of 1861, early in the American Civil War. In 1862, the Union Army regained control of the fort and also occupied New Orleans. Okay, so there you go. So it says the United States built it, but somehow the Confederate States had control of it at the start of the war, and then the Union Army took control. That's bogus. And that is right on the money when you consider the fact that the Confederate States Army was really the Indians. See the portholes in it? Those look familiar, don't they? Going all the way down to Veracruz in that temple. Same kind of thing right here, American Indian style. But let's go over here to Fort Pulaski in Savannah. Right here it says Fort Pulaski National Monument is located on Cockspur Island between Savannah and Tybee Island, Georgia. It preserves Fort Pulaski, where in 1862, during the American Civil War, the Union Army successfully tested rifle cannon in combat, the success of which rendered brick fortifications obsolete. So the Confederates were at that fort when the Union Army came through testing rifle cannons on it. Once again, those were Indians in the fort getting those rifle cannon balls shot at. So let's go look at see how it looked right there in Georgia. Same design. See these mounds right in front of it? See the mounds on this pyramid shaped thing? American Indian style. And that is right here where that green color is in Georgia. So let's move right over here to Charleston, right here on the map, Charleston. It's called Fort Sumner Island. Learn all about this storied spot of the first clash between the Union and Confederate armies in the Civil War, in which the Union forces finally surrendered after a 34-hour bombardment by the rebels. Pause. Now you see how they call them rebels? Remember down in Veracruz on the porch there when the rebels were being attacked by first Spanish, then the French, and then the Americans? Same thing. They call American Indians rebels. But as we look right here, it seems that they can't get their story straight about the fort on Fort Sumner Island, which right here it says that basically the Union forces surrendered to the Confederates that were bombarding the fort. But over here it says that Charleston's appetite for revolution continued in the 1800s as the city blazed a path to succession to safeguard slavery. So if the Confederates were in Charleston the whole time safeguarding slavery, it would seem that they were also at that base, which would be right here. You see it in the water, but that's not out into the ocean. That's inland right in here. Now let's see how the fort looked in design. Right here you can see that it has a mound on top of it right there. And it has those curvages like the rest of the forts. And this is how Fort Sumner or Fort Charleston looks. Same design. Work on Fort Sumner or Fort Charleston in South Carolina didn't start until 1829, it says. However, they weren't there building a fort. They were barely in Georgia in 1829 in certain areas. And then in 1830, they passed the Indian Removal Act. So there's no way that they were building a fort. On top of that, you can go into the laws and you'll see that the Cherokees and the Creeks were taking them to court. So it says. But these forts had to have been how those Creeks and other tribes were still in those places after those wars, say the Creek Wars in the 18 teens or in the early 1820s. That's how they were able to stay there and continue to fight up and until the end of the Civil War. Now let's move over here to Wilmington, South Carolina, right here. In Wilmington, you have Fort Fisher was a Confederate fort during the American Civil War. As we can see, it's right here where that red dot is at on the map right here. Yeah, not South Carolina. We just dealt with Charleston right there. Now we dealing with Wilmington, North Carolina, which is right here on the map. Down here it says that Wilmington was able to be defended for a considerable duration of the war. So the Indians held it out there for a long time. And it says that the Indians there, it was a major port, traded cotton and tobacco in exchange for foreign goods like munitions, clothing, and foodstuffs. Goes on to say that trade was based on the coming and going of steamer ships of British smugglers. Now this is Fort Fisher right here, pretty much. And as you can see, it goes in and it's a mound, an Indian mound. That's how the Indians were able to hold off here for so long. It says Fort Fisher State Park, Carolina, right there. Next, we're going to move over to Fort Riley in North Carolina, which is basically right here, where it's the darker colored, meaning they were there fighting for the longest time during the American Civil War. On Wikipedia, under the history of Fort Riley, it says the Union Army occupied the island in 1862 and soon established a contraband camp for slave refugees. Okay, now what's a contraband camp? Contraband, reported in English since 1529 from medieval French contraband, a smuggling, denotes any item that relating to its nature is illegally possessed or sold. So they were saying that slaves were an item that couldn't be illegally possessed or sold. Goes on to say that it founded the Roanoke Island Freedmen's Colony in 1863 to be self-sustaining. Pause. In a previous video, we learned that over 2,000 so-called slaves built a Fort Nagley in Tennessee with those diamond-shaped structures all about it. We also learned that down in Fort Brown in Texas, after the war, there was left 100 plus Buffalo Soldiers. Here we learning that some blacks, some so-called slaves at a fort, founded the Roanoke Island Freedmen's Colony in 1863 to be self-sustaining. Now, the Buffalo Soldiers stayed from 1866 at that six-pointed star-shaped fort in Fort Brown in Brownsville, Texas, from 1866 to 1906 when they were treacherously blackballed out of the place. But right here's a picture of the Fort Riley right here. You see the diamond shape? See how big it is? It's not something small. You see how the people there look very tiny inside of it. It's a major thing right here. Typical American Indian structure creativity. Then somewhere right around up in here is another fort called Fort Atlantic Beach or Fort Macon, Atlantic Beach, North Carolina. And this is what it looks like. This is Fort Macon at Atlantic Beach, North Carolina. It says a Civil War fort. Now, as you can see how it goes, it drops down right here. And then the building has those portholes. And then up here, it has earth like it's a mound on top. The same exact way of building this structure. Now we've seen this same structure formation down in South or Central America. I just wanted to point that out. This will reoccur a few more times inside of doing these episodes. The Civil War fort that we never heard about. All those Civil War movies look like the Wild Wild West, all dusty with log cabins. Here we got full on brick structures, fortifications just about everywhere, because this is not even half of them. So far we covered forts in Jacksonville, Savannah, Charleston, Wilmington, Raleigh, and the Atlantic Beach. So before I go up any further, I'm going to go inland and show more forts from inside of this area right here. Through the history books, which has all been a lie. So therefore, if it's a lie, then what's the truth? If it's a lie, then